Aloha. My name is Kenneth Lawson. I'm the new host of Life in the Law. This show was hosted by Professor Danielle Conway. She's on sabbatical, so I will be taking her place, and hopefully you'll enjoy this show. This is my first time doing this, so as soon as I get the nervousness out, I feel like Brian Gumble on HBO. But anyway, today we're going to talk about police misconduct. We're going to talk about what's been going on throughout the nation over the last several weeks or last several days, but it has been culminating over the last couple of years, and it's finally erupted in Ferguson, Missouri. We're going to talk about use of force. Today I have a guest with me. His name is Vladmir Devens. And Vlad, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And you came highly recommended by a lot of people because you represent police officers that are accused of misconduct. Well, I'll let you speak for yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background.
A little bit about myself. I'm born and raised here in Honolulu, product of the public school system, a graduate of Kalani High School. I did my undergraduate college work at the University of California at Berkeley, majored in economics, and also went to law school there at Berkeley at Bothell.
Oh, you're smart.
I don't know about
man,
that.
They don't,
my dad
Berkeley doesn't let anybody in.
Yeah. So anyway, that's where I got my law degree from. I'm presently in private practice. I have my own law firm. As it may be, one of my associates is also a former police officer, and whose mother was also a longtime detective that has already retired.
Wow.
So he's proven to be a very valuable asset. We also represent the police union. We serve as their chief counsel, SHOPA, which is a statewide public union. So we represent all of the county police officers, things from the contract negotiations, which we handled most recently, down to the grievances that involve use of force, terminations, discharge, those kinds of things. So that's what my practice is all about. But I also do personal injury as well, and I do it on the plaintiff side or the victim side. So I have a view of both sides of what's involved and what goes into the analysis when you look at situations.
Now you were also a police officer.
That's
too,
right.
For how many years?
I served full-time with the Honolulu Police Department for 6 years. Did most of my time in Waikiki as a crew officer, which was a plainclothes unit.
So what got you interested into the law with respect to not just policing, but then going on from there to becoming an attorney that represents the police?
Yeah, what had actually happened was that in law, I had done my law school before I went into the police department. And when I was in law school, I had applied for the FBI at the time. But back in the 80s, you may remember, there was a federal freeze. So I was going through the process. I'd been accepted. But because of the budget freeze, they froze all the positions. So I came back to Honolulu. I had student loans that were becoming due. So I started working with my father's firm. My father was a longtime trial attorney here. And from there, I was recruited into the Honolulu Police Department, into a certain unit. When I got into the department, I ended up going to another unit and really enjoyed the work that I was doing there. I speak Japanese, and at that time, Japanese organized crime was a big thing on the state. So that was one of the reasons why I went into the department. And
that's pretty dangerous work, I'd imagine.
Yes.
So a little bit about my background. You and I spoke a little bit before. I tried cases in Cincinnati for 18 years. I was a criminal defense attorney, and I did 20% of my cases with civil rights. I sued the police officers that you represent, not here in Honolulu, but in Cincinnati. And so that's why I wanted you to be here, at least to give the opposing view of what it's like, because in the community I was in, we were subject to riots in 2001, and I represented all the families of individuals who had been killed. Back then, in a 2-year period, we had 15 unarmed black men killed at the hands of the police. And on the 15th man that was killed, the city erupted into riots. And I was in the middle of all that, and it just, what's going on in Ferguson just reminded me so much of what happened. It's so identical because we had curfews. We had people being, the police became very paramilitary. People were being shot with beanbags. Tear gas was being, and it just erupted into a city where it was just chaos. It was just total chaos. And it took 4 nights for that to end. And even then, for a few years after that, there was such great division in the community. Can you tell us what do you think, why is there such a great divide between the community and the police?
Well, let me just first state that, my heart goes out to that family. The young man, he was only 18 years old at the time. It was a tragedy, and, that family has lost a son. And, we feel for people that have, whether he was right or wrong, they still lost. And my sympathy goes to the family, but also to the officer, what he and his family are now going through. And I'm not going to sit here and justify and say what he did was right or wrong, because we don't have all the facts. And I think part of the problem is that we only get bits and pieces, and people latch on to that, and they start rushing to a judgment. I think the prudent thing, and it's easy to say, but emotions are running very high. And, your own experience, that it builds up after a while, and then it explodes. And I think that's what County of Ferguson is dealing with at this time. When you hear bits and pieces, I know one of the things that I read in the paper was that an eyewitness, supposedly, had said that it looked like the officer shot at least one round into the young man's back. The family hired that pathologist, the celebrity pathologist, Baden. He came in, and from what I read, he said that all of the shots were from the front. So already you have an eyewitness that says that, hey, one shot went into this guy's back, and people grab onto it and say, hey, what's going on? But then you have the own family pathologist saying, hey, wait a minute. None went into the back. It looked like all from the front. So I think that causes people to start taking sides and start polarizing before we really have all the information.
Do you think it was relevant when the police chief released a video of the young man? He was 6'4", pretty big guy,
300 pounds, they said.
300 pounds. And it shows him bullying a little short store clerk as he's allegedly taking cigars out. But on the other hand, the officer who did the shooting admitted that he had no idea that he was a suspect in a robbery. Do you see that as being relevant? Do you see that as stoking the flames on this already?
It's hard. You could look at it from both sides, right? I mean, why did you have to show just that part of it? But, when we look at it from a union side, we try to look at all the facts. If you just take a snippet, for example, if you just take that store clerk got pushed, in the neck or throat, whatever it was, did the officer know about it at the time he got the call? We don't know. But, those kinds of things keep the flames going. And I don't know what the reason was for that. When people say, hey, this boy was a nice boy, I don't disbelieve that. I'm sure in his household, and, it's their son. What do you expect them to say? But at the same time, what he was doing just before this happened wasn't a good boy.
Right. And I think, the argument that I fully expect the police and whoever represents the officer to basically state is, this shows his demeanor, his being the victim's demeanor. And if he was like this to a store clerk, if he was bullying the clerk, he'd probably try to bully the police, et cetera. So there's a lot. I guess my point is, and when I did cases like this that were high profile, I was always trying to put out things that made the officer or the city look bad, right? And then and it was always something else that would come out later from the other side, and it just kept going and going. And I've learned through experience, you kind of just got to sit back and wait till all the facts are in.
As a union, we get so many different types of cases. I mean, our experience is that we got to wait. As officers, we're human. Do we make mistakes? Yes, we'll be the first to admit that to you. And when we talk to our officers, we want to be transparent. We want to be clean in what we're doing, because it's a very, a job we have is very important, in our community. But at the same time, we just hope the error isn't so great that it causes harm to anybody. But at the same time, there's a lot of cases where we didn't commit an error. But because you only saw one piece, it really looks like we did something, but he left out all the background that led up to that one point in time. So, our experience is, hey, we got to gather everything. And I think you even have our president saying, hey, look, we got to step back. Cooler heads prevail. Let's gather all the facts first. They got the DOJ, Department of Justice, coming in.
Now, do you think that's fair? Now, let's assume that you are out there representing the officer, and you got protesters saying, we're not leaving until you indict this officer. You got the president and then the U.S. attorney now, Eric Holder's in Ferguson today, right? Do you think that that's unfair pressure for almost forcing the county to indict this officer?
Well, what I took it for, my first blush at it was that they were bringing it in to show that we're going to have integrity. that's going to go on with this investigation. We're bringing the weight of the federal government in here to make sure that nothing is swept under the rug. The investigation is done thorough and completely. From a police department point of view, I would welcome that. Hey, you want to see what we're doing? You should, and it would reassure the public that things are done correctly.
Yeah.
So, on one hand, it could be looked at that, hey, you're really bringing pressure down to force an indictment where maybe an indictment is not warranted. And yes, you read about it, you got that grand jury in there, they know protests are going on.
Yeah.
What do you expect at that point? Yeah. But I think with the government coming in, it takes it to another level. Certainly it does.
What does an officer's family go through when this is going? And a lot of people focus on the victim, his family, the protesters. You got people coming from outside of, just people just kind of agitating. But what is the officer going through and his family?
When you talk about the protest, and I'll tell you, does it help or does it hurt a situation? It can really do both. In Ferguson, you see it hurting the community where you have legitimate protesters out there, but then you have a criminal element that's using that guise to go looting, shooting, and violence is erupting, and that's not what it's all about. But if you have protesters out there that are legitimately trying to highlight and make sure there's a spotlight on the issue to make sure things are done right, I welcome that. As a union, I think we look at that and say, that's fine. We just want to make sure things are done right. Our union really stresses taking care of the family because the officer, we're big boys and big girls. We know what we're getting into when we take that oath and we're out on the street and we got to do what we got to do. But our families don't really take that same burden. They're there, they support us, but that's not really on them, but it becomes on them. The kids are going to school, they read about their father or their mother involved in a shooting, their name comes out. You'll be surprised, what our kids go through. And that's what we try to protect against because you can put it on us. We can take that. We understand what the job is. But when our family starts getting hurt, and I can tell you our president, really takes a protective role on that to protect the families. And I don't mean protecting against we're hiding something, but protecting their well-being and their emotions and so on. So to answer your question, it is a very trying time on our families.
How are officers trained when it comes to using deadly force? Here you got, in fact, we're going to show a video in a few minutes where in Waikiki, a person was shot that was unarmed, but in a vehicle going away from the officer. What type of training do the officers receive on when they can use deadly force?
Well, you know better than anyone else, Professor Lawson, the use of force, the deadly force, it's got to be an immediate threat and it's got to be immediately necessary. And we're talking about risk of death, so, serious bodily injury, there's a rape, kidnapping, forcible sodomy. That's what the law, black letter law, provides. But the law also says it's from the viewpoint of the officer or the person that's going to use the force as they perceive the circumstances to be. And you understand that that's what the law provides for. So in training, it's a very intense training at the Honolulu Police Department. I'll tell you, it's one of the best academies in the country. We've got accolades for the work that we do, the level of certifications and training experience that our trainers have there. Just the recruit school alone is 5.5 months. And then you go another 3.5 months riding with a seasoned officer, and then another 3.5 months on foot patrol. So it's about a year before we cut that officer loose to say, you can now go out on your own. And even then, they're still supervised at all times. So as far as use of force, you get the recruit training, not only classroom teaching of the laws, but also hands-on training, firearms training, scenarios, shoot, don't shoot type of scenarios. And then we also have annual retraining. So we have to go back every year to get a refresher, qualified on our firearms. So it's a pretty intense training, and it's very continuous and ongoing.
All right, let's do this. We're going to go to a break real quick, and we'll be back to show you a video of a shooting that occurred in Waikiki, and then to get Vlad's thoughts on that right after this break.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Alalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
All right, my name is Kenneth Lawson. If you have just joined us, what we're talking about here is police misconduct on Life and the Law. Again, this is my first time hosting this show because Professor Danielle Conway, who was the previous host, is now on sabbatical in Florida, enjoying teaching there. And while she's gone, I'll be the host of this show. And we're talking about police use of force. Police misconduct, shootings, when can an officer use deadly force, what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri, and as our guest we have Vladmir Devens, who represents the police union here in Hawaii, has been a former police officer himself, knows what the training is like when it comes to use of force. And before we get back to you, Vlad, I want to show this video and then get your opinion on this. Do we have the video? It's coming right up.
Wild video tonight of a Maui mayoral candidate getting tased by a police officer. As you might imagine, the chase did not end well for him. KITV4's Andrew Pereira has tonight's top story. Andrew.
Yunji, Kenny, Bo Hawk says the officer who shot him with a taser gun was out of line. A local attorney who worked on a groundbreaking taser case in 2006 agrees.
Come on, cop! You can't do this, dude! Running down well. You can't do this!
Chase, jolt, and a face-first fall right on the pavement. 12 dramatic seconds that began with a belief. 34-year-old Bo Hawks of Makawao claims he's not required to display license plates or follow other county laws because of our country's founding documents.
The Declaration of Independence is not our independence as a country. It is our independence.
One of the laws he apparently chose to ignore was the ban on talking on a cell phone while driving. A lieutenant with Maui Police tells Maui News he pulled him over for that infraction, but Hawks drove off. The officer spotted the mayoral candidate leaving the county building about an hour later, and chaos erupted.
Come on, cop! You can't do this, dude! Running down well. You can't do this! Hey!
Hawks was shot with a taser after the police officer caught up with him on Wells Street near the county building in Wailuku.
Tasers are a violation of our human rights. Tasers, Maui County, Maui Police Department will be the first police department to ban the use of tasers. The ban on the tasers will be part of the lawsuit.
Honolulu attorney Eric Seitz represented Jazo Matos in a groundbreaking taser case involving Maui police officers in 2006. Seitz doesn't think Hawks can outlaw the use of tasers by Maui County Police, but he believes Hawks does have a case.
My belief is that without question this officer ought to be relieved of his duties, put on desk assignment, and probably subjected to a serious disciplinary action.
Seitz says the Matos case set a clear precedent when officers can use their tasers. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals called it intermediate level of force.
That means you can only use it in circumstances where the police officer is threatened with some degree of harm or members of the public are threatened with some degree of harm.
Because Hawks had no weapon, did not appear to threaten the officer, and was not involved in a felony, Seitz says he could have been easily apprehended. Plus, police backup was on its way.
They could have chased him down in their vehicles. Maybe somebody more physically fit than the officer who shot the taser could have easily caught him and constrained him physically.
The Maui County Police Department did not respond to a KITV4 request seeking comment. The Maui News says Hawks was arrested for resisting arrest and disobeying a police officer. Hawks says he was arrested for 7 traffic violations. Kenny and Yunji, back to you.
All right, that was the wrong, I announced the wrong video. But we're going to show the one in Waikiki, the shooting that happened last month or a month, I think in July, in a few minutes. But that one was on tasing. And when I was involved after the riots in Cincinnati, we sued the police in a class action lawsuit. And then the judge got us together, the federal judge, and she said, look, we're tired of these same old suits where it's just us versus them. Why don't we try to do something constructive? So we ended what's called a collaborative process. And we had to invite the police union in, the city of Cincinnati, the police, and the community. And everybody had to have a stake in the settlement of this. And what it made us do was, instead of pointing the finger at the police, it made the community start looking at itself. What can I do better? You know, when we talk about what's going on in Ferguson, what can we do better to teach our children not to go into these places, bullying people, whatever? What is my responsibility? At the same time, the police had to look at theirs, because what happened in these cases was everybody's pointing fingers. So we ended up settling that suit 4 years later with the Attorney General from the United States under George Bush, John Ashcroft. He came down, he signed off on that historic document. So now we're getting calls from Ferguson on how we can help them. But in that agreement, tasers was brought up. And I objected to the use of tasers, with the exception of when an officer felt that he was in danger of serious physical harm or deadly force. What is your view on the tasers and what we saw there?
Well, I talked about earlier is where we just get kind of a snippet of, what happened. And, if you just look at that, it looks like a guy running away, gets tased, and he does a face palm.
I don't mean to laugh, but it did
No,
look kind of
no,
funny.
but, it is what it is. And, you look at it, it's like, gee, what really happened. But I think, and all I really know about the case, and I'll preface it by, is what I've seen on the news, these same clips and so on. But you have to back it up to see what precipitated all of that. Was there a threat? Did the officer say you're under arrest, and then the guy takes off? Because as you know, when an officer is arresting or trying to effect arrest, no one can use force against us, even if the arrest is unlawful. What you do is you can come sue us later, and there's plenty of attorneys out there who'd be more than happy to do that, or you go to court and you have the issue resolved. But you cannot use force against the officer, and that's how we just keep civil order.
It's not only that you can't legally do it, but factually you should just not,
Well, yeah, it's for the purposes that, hey, we're just trying to keep order, and hey, if it's a false arrest or whatever it may turns out to be, then you have your recourse.
Right.
But we don't want it to be force and fighting and so on. In this case, I don't know what precipitated. I don't know what this guy's record is. I don't know what his history is.
Well, let's assume though that he's just running away. The reason why I objected back then, and I still object now to the use of tasers is because it could be abused. I get angry at you. I told you that you're under arrest. Now you want to run from me. And again, we don't know all the facts in this case. Now I'm going to tase you. And to me, that's why I objected to it in the collaborative. It ended up being put into it. But we see lawsuits later in Cincinnati and other places where the use of tasers have been abused.
I apologize that I can't remember there was a recent case or recent ruling that I think in fact involved Maui that had to do with tasers, and I don't recall the exact facts or what the exact ruling was, but there was a ruling that had to do about the propriety of using the taser in that case, and I apologize I don't have that case, because I think that would have answered some of the questions about what you're talking about. We as officers, we're with you in terms of, we shouldn't be abusing it. If someone's coming at us and it's a way to use force without going to our firearm or something more lethal, then yes, it's a lesser amount of force that we should use. There's appropriate situations. Be honest with you, I don't know offhand what Maui's policy is on use of force or when the taser can and cannot be used. And that's something that would have to be examined to see whether or not, is this a proper situation or not? One
thing I can say about the Honolulu Police Department, at least since my time being here, since 2008, normally when there's a shooting or something to that effect, immediately as much information as possible is being given to the community, which makes it transparent. A lot of distrust, at least from my point of view and my experience, was when we being a community, never knew what was going on. And the report will be released when we get finished with our investigation, and it's not released for days. In the community, we become very, very suspicious of that, especially in the African American community. We were very suspicious of that. And again, I don't see that here.
Well, I think when we talk African American and the experiences that they've gone through, there's good basis to have suspicion, for what they've gone through as a group. I did my schooling on the mainland. I had some experience with what goes on there. And Hawaii is just such a unique place in terms of a melting pot and the races and ethnicities that we deal with. And I think there is a certain level of trust that people do have as a community with our police officers. Everyone knows a police officer. There are neighbors, there are coaches, they're in Little League. We have a lot of great athletes that are police officers, both male and female, that do a lot of coaching out in our community and are well known. So I think we have a higher level of trust. And that's my personal opinion, but that's what I see. That you know, we welcome the officers. They're always there to help us. Need an extra hand, that's where we go to. Everyone knows if you have an officer living on your block, because that's the person you go to if there's a problem.
I want to show the second video. And this involves the shooting in Waikiki I referred to earlier. And if we could show that, and then I'll ask you a few questions right after that one's over.
Army says the driver who was shot and killed is a Schofield Barracks soldier. Honolulu police are investigating if the 3 officers who fired at him followed standard procedure. Breanne Randall joins us with more on that.
Joe, those officers are all on paid leave as a joint criminal and administrative investigation begins into the deadly shooting. This video, first shown on KHON2 News, will likely be a key part of the investigation into the police shooting of a man in Waikiki early Tuesday morning.
I think the video, and I'm sure most of you have seen it, clearly shows the dangerousness of that situation.
Honolulu police say there were 2 separate sites where officers discharged their standard issue Smith & Wesson 9mm at the suspect truck. The first was when an officer fired on Kuhio Avenue. Then 2 other officers used deadly force to stop the suspect on Alawai Boulevard.
We discharge our weapon when the officer believes they're using that force to protect themselves or others from death or serious bodily injury.
HPD says each officer worked on patrol and their length of service on the force ranges between 3 and 20 years. The suspect, who was shot and killed, has been identified as a 22-year-old Schofield Barracks soldier with the 25th Infantry Division and had served 1 deployment to Afghanistan. The 25th Infantry Division spokesman said in a statement, "This is an incredibly tragic incident, and we offer our condolences to the soldier's family and to the officers injured."
I would always want to wait and see and find out what we find out. First of all, it was at 4 o'clock in the morning in Waikiki. Was the person under the influence of alcohol or drugs?
Ackland specializes in forensic psychology, which studies the state of mind of a person when they commit a crime.
Almost all crime is committed under the influence of alcohol.
The shooting is the latest crime in recent months involving military service members. In December, an Army staff sergeant was arrested for going on a rampage and damaging military property. In November, a soldier led military police on a high-speed chase across Oahu. And in October, a former soldier made a threatening call, prompting a manhunt. But Ackland says there is not enough information to link these cases.
First of all, I think you have to be very careful about drawing any conclusions that somehow the other these incidents are directly related to, for example, the presumed combat experience, for example.
The suspect's name is being withheld pending notification of his family. The truck he was driving was registered to someone else, but police say it had not been reported stolen. Breanne Randall, KHON2 News, Hawaii's news leader.
All right, there you have it. We're going to go to a quick break and come back and give Vlad's opinion on that now. Talk about the other shooting that happened about a month ago in Waikiki under similar circumstances. Right back after this message. All right, we're back on the air, and Vlad, we saw right before the right before the break, the video of the shooting in Waikiki that involved the Schofield soldier. Last month, we had another shooting here in Waikiki where the individual was driving away from the police officer and was shot and killed. The driver was shot and killed. And some people have a problem when the officer's not in danger, the vehicle's going the other way from the officer, so there's no threat of hitting an officer. How can the officer justify using deadly force in that situation when the person is not trying to injure anybody?
Well, you know, if you look at both of the cases that you're referring to, including the most recent one, from what I understand from the news accounts was that both of them were highly intoxicated, had been drinking, from what I understand. So they're not in the right frame of mind, number one. Officers are telling them to stop, they're not stopping. The most recent one, as tragic as it was, from what I understand, he was driving in a very reckless manner. This is Waikiki, this isn't out in the country where it's wide open. We have tourists, it could be our kids, our parents, our grandparents walking in the crosswalk and gets run over. So now you have a situation where the person may not have been armed, but if you're driving a 3,000-pound vehicle, that is a deadly machine now. It's a deadly machine, but I guess what I'm saying is the fact that the person says, okay, look, the officer says stop, and the person, as in this case, at least the last one, the person continues to drive. Does the officer need a real threat? I mean, people in front of the vehicle, I mean, can he just shoot because he's not stopping? Or can, after I shoot, can the officer just say, well, you know what, he could have went and hit somebody? Well, you know, I think you have to go back to what the law allows as far as deadly force. And it's got to be an immediate threat, immediate necessity to use the force. And the officer, as you know, the department came out and says, making split-second decisions on what he needs to do. And again, the law says it's the perception of the officer or the person using the force, what they perceive the circumstances to be. Clearly, the officer perceived that there was danger. There was threat of death, serious bodily injury to maybe not only himself, but others in the area. And, you know, I haven't talked to the officer. I don't know any other facts. I'm not directly involved in that at this point in time because the investigation is ongoing. But I believe that that's what the officer obviously believed at the time. Now, on the other side of that, then because my argument would be, I mean, again, we don't know what happened. We're both talking hypothetical, but just from our experiences, and my experience in the past would have been, you know what, that sometimes when we have these confrontations, the adrenaline level is risen on both sides. And at some point, the officer's adrenaline may block out his logical thinking. And this, to me, the fact that he was ignoring the officer's command, an officer gets kind of angry or upset and shoots him. Is that plausible? Well, you know, almost anything is plausible. But, you know, again, that's assuming that those were the facts. Right. And again, we don't know what all the facts are. And that's why I always say, you know, we have to reserve judgment before we say something, and then it's taken as a statement of fact. They grab onto that. And that's why I'm very hesitant to say, hey, you know, what if this and this happened? Well, I really don't know. I mean, I'd like to see the whole investigation, all the statements. And I think if you saw the rest of that clip, you had witnesses that came on who were right there and said everything that officer did was correct. And they were happy, glad that the officer took action. No one's glad that anyone died, of course not. Right. You know, it's tragic, very tragic. Do you think it's... But what I was going to say, there were also witnesses on the other side that said what the officer did didn't appear to be justified. So now, you know, like the Didi case, you have witnesses on both sides. You have a hung jury. They can't decide manslaughter or assault. They acquit on the murder. And I think you'd have a divergence of opinions on whether or not that was right or wrong. Yeah, and we're going to talk, that's going to be the subject of our show next week. But the difference in the Didi case and these two shootings in Waikiki is that none of these officers were drinking. These officers were on duty, where Didi was at least allegedly going to bars and right before the shooting and was off duty. And so I guess the question is, what type of, when you talk about the training, is there a policy where I'd rather see the person just go than shoot them? Instead of, do I have to make the arrest? No, there's of course situations where, you know, like a minor traffic incident or, you know, very minor thing and the guy flees. Yeah, there may be, it may be circumstances where it would be more dangerous for me to try and chase that person down because the infraction was so minor. Yeah. You know, we use our judgment, our discretion. of course, we're trying to uphold the law. You're trying to protect you and I, our families, our property, our lives when we do things. But yes, there's discretion where the officer's trying to use their best judgment. Now, you know, what you're talking about when you have that adrenaline rush, you know, they're trained so that they don't go into what they call code black, which is where you just kind of blank out.
Yeah.
We do, with the training, hopefully that kicks in, so what we're doing is automatic. We're doing as we're trained to do repeatedly, so that it comes very natural, and that's the hope and why we do so much training. But
some people ask this too, and we talked before the show, why so many shots? You know, some of the cases that we see nationwide, you know, they're sometimes the whole jacket, I mean the whole gun is empty, and people think that that's excessive force. Can you explain what's going on with the?
I think, you know, you had touched upon it earlier, that part of it is that adrenaline rush. You know, there are instances that I'm aware of, even involving officers on the mainland, where we went back and analyzed, you know, what had happened. They could not remember how many times they pulled the trigger. The clip may have been empty. They didn't realize that they pulled it that many times. A lot of times what's happening is that, I think in Ferguson, and again, these are just news accounts that I'm basing my recollection on, is that they said he was shot, this young man was shot six times. 4 were in the arm. Okay, those aren't good hits from a perspective of trying to apprehend or stop a threat. Because we're taught center mass, and then you take them on the top.
So when you shoot, you're taught to shoot to kill.
No, not necessarily. No. Yeah, you're trying to stop the threat. You know, you're trying to stop the threat. Once the threat is over, pow.
Yeah, but you're taught to. You're saying you're taught to shoot center mass or in the head, which.
No, it's center mass, and you can go up or you can go down. You know,
up would be the head, though.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, no, of course, yeah. But what it is that it's very difficult when someone is coming at you and doing this to say, oh, shoot him in the arm, or just shoot him in the leg. You know, I mean, that takes a very skilled.
That's the stuff you see in the movies.
Right, but you know, the lay person out there, you know, that's their view of what reality is what they see on TVs, and I understand that, and you got to understand that when you hear that from them. But you know, in reality, we know from our experience that that's not practical. That yes, you know, we got to stop the threat, and the way the training that we've had is that you try to hit them center mass to stop them.
Right, right, and I think even from my experience in defending people in the criminal aspect, and the defense was self-defense, a lot of my clients had shot multiple times. Whenever I would ask them why, they would just say, you know what, I just kept shooting till the person stopped. And when I was doing a lot of police misconduct cases, I learned that in a lot of seminars, that the fact that an officer shot a lot of times doesn't mean that he was trying to purposely kill somebody, that the training, that it just happens in a very rapid, fast motion. And it's easy to sit back on Monday and be a Monday morning quarterback and try to second guess each individual shot.
You know, and a lot of times too, you don't know if your rounds hit. You know, if they hit the target or not. Because if the person keeps coming at you, you may have shot them 4 or 5 times, but they're still coming at you.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can't just go off the shot count itself, but that's what the media sensationalizes. They say, well, you know, it was 6 shots. But, you know, according to the pathologist, 4 hit the arm, 2 hit the head. But if you also read in that Ferguson case, their pathologist, the family's pathologist, said the one to the head that they think killed the young man may have been when he was trying to surrender, putting his head down, or when he was coming at the officer.
But I guess the question becomes, if he's unarmed, why are you shooting anyway?
Well, we don't know what he was doing. I mean, just to say you're unarmed when you're 6'4", as I understand from the news accounts, he was 6'4", just shy of 300 pounds. I don't need a weapon to be deadly. You know, that's a big man.
That's a big man, but doesn't the law say that I'd rather see you just take a butt whooping than to go kill somebody?
Well, I take a butt whooping and he gets my gun. Now what?
Well, yeah, then the threat of life is there, obviously, right?
Right. We cannot afford to get a butt whooping as an officer when we're trying to protect people like you.
All right. So what you're saying is it's okay for an officer to use deadly force in a fist fight?
Well, it depends on what it's escalating up to. See, the way we meet force with force, it's not even, because then it's just a tug of war.
Right.
It's always +1. You know, we go up 1 to make sure that we can take care of that threat, stop it, quell it.
That's that continuum that you guys have been trained on. Explain that a little bit.
Well, what it is, you know, they think that, hey, you should just be using the same amount of force as the person that's coming at you. And that doesn't quite work, because then it's just an even match, and it can go on forever.
Your goal is to win.
Well, it's to win for you folks. so that that person who, whatever he has done, is stopped right here and then, and is not breaking into your house tomorrow, is not raping your kids tomorrow. We're going to stop it right here and then. And so what I'm saying is that we got to go one up, so that we're a little higher.
So
to stop it.
even at 300 pounds, isn't one up the taser, as opposed to
May or may
the
not
gun?
be. Yeah. One, I don't know if he had one at the time.
Yeah.
Number two, I don't know if he could have got it out in time. Maybe he was trying to get it out and just couldn't get it out. Maybe it wasn't operable at the time. You know, there's a lot of variables, and you make a good point on that, but I just don't know.
That's okay, but as far as training is concerned, if the officers are equipped with tasers, right, and the taser's working, what is the continuum there? To go, is one up?
Yeah, you know, yeah. You
following?
can, yeah, no, you can. And, you know, the other thing is this, you know, if you look at, you know, some of the officers that we have in Honolulu, they're not all 6'4", 300 pounds.
Right.
You know, we have some very much smaller officers, you know, 5 feet,
Yeah.
you know, 120 pounds, male, female. And so you also have to look at that. You know, if I got a 6'4" person coming against a 5-foot male officer, okay, the odds are a little bit different. He may be able to use different types of force as opposed maybe me and you dealing with the same guy. So it depends on what the variables are. And, you know, I know you understand that, but just to make that point that it really depends on what's going on. Taser could be very well justified depending on what's going on, of course.
So,
but I know you don't like the taser.
well, I like the taser. I like the taser in deadly force situations. That's what I was for it being used then. When the officer feels his life is threatened, or of serious physical harm or death, then yes, use the taser. But I saw instances, you know, and I don't hardly see any of this in Honolulu, but where I was from, I mean, I had clients that would get locked back in the police cruiser, and on a hot day, 90 degrees, and the officer would spray the mace inside his own cruiser, lock the doors, and roll up the windows, and then just let the person sit in there, right? And so that type of abuse with mace, I started thinking could happen to people with tasers. Now, the beautiful thing is what happened 10 years after we entered into our collaborative agreement in Cincinnati, where all the community took their part, ownership, police, etc. The police complaints went way down. The grievances went way down. The police shootings went way down. The community and the police working together really diffused the us versus them mentality, and the stops of African American males that had been twice as likely right before the riots had went down dramatically when there was no probable cause to stop. And I think that's one of the lessons that I would like to see Ferguson learn from this, is that, you know, we're never going to resolve these problems going at each other. It's like being in a marriage. You know, if I'm always pointing the finger at you and not looking at my part, how are we ever going to change? Until I look at me and say, okay, here's what I can do to make it better.
No, you make a good point, and you know, I can tell you that part of our philosophy as a union has been, since our current president came in, was to try and work with management the best way we can. You know, it used to be always, as you say, point the finger, you're wrong, we're wrong, whatever it may be. And I think we've come a long way in trying to work things out. We can't agree to everything. You know, it's still management and still a union on, you know, each side, and we got to protect our members' benefits and their rights, and we do that the best we can, and we'll fight hard for that. But at the same time, you know, where we can meet halfway, we really try to do that. And I think it's made for a better working relationship, and it's taken away some of the acrimony that has existed before.
And speaking of police contracts between the union, and one of the things we talked about before the show was, and what used to really raise suspicion, at least from the plaintiff side, those of us that were suing the police for misconduct, was after a shooting or a use of force incident, the officer has a right to an attorney present before anybody can question him. Does that happen here too?
Yes, you know, under our contract, we do have a period of time, and just so you know, there's a better understanding of what it's for. It's not so much to try and get a lawyer in there to see whatever they can do, but it's really to bring that officer down. You know, when you get a discharge, anytime you discharge your firearm, it's a very traumatic event. When we train with, you know, earplugs. When you're not wearing that, and you got that ringing of that sound, and you've discharged your gun, it's trauma. You know, it's a very high stress, under high duress. Officer coming out of that situation needs time to just cool down, just to gather his or her thoughts, recollect the best they can what had happened. It's not easy. And that's why we look at that as just more of a period of time where they gather themselves, try and bring yourself down, gather up your thoughts, and now go ahead and give the best statement, the best recollection that you can.
So a guy like me thinks that the officer's making up stories on why he shot my client.
That's not the purpose of it. Yeah. No,
Right.
but I mean, I understand the suspicion, and that's a natural suspicion. So I don't fault someone for thinking that way, but I just want to tell you what we as a union, why we asked that be part of the contract, and which the employer, in fact, agreed to on the department side, and it was for that purpose because we've seen where the officers start giving statements right away, and they're so discombobulated that it's all over the place.
I would advise all my criminal clients the same thing, whether they're officers or not.
Well, I'll tell you one thing is that when
silent.
and I'll tell you one thing is that when you discharge your firearm, we become a suspect. Okay, so we're not treated any different than you. You want a lawyer, you can get one, and we're no different. But our officers, I'll tell you, from my experience, they always give statements. They have nothing to hide. They're going to give the best recollection they can. And it doesn't do away with having to do what they're supposed to do right away. You can't just go sit down and take a time out and not facilitate the investigation. They're still obligated to do that.
Cooperate in investigation.
Yeah, but just so there's an understanding, that's really the reasoning behind having that. And we as a union do provide an attorney to go down. And it's basically, I've been at scenes that have been super traumatic. Yeah, I'm just trying to settle down the officer. Gather yourself up. Let's do this thing right.
Well, Vlad, I'm glad that you joined us this week
Thank you for having
as
me.
my first guest, man. You know what? You did a terrific job. But seriously, you know what? The police union is lucky to have you represent them.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me.
And I'm really glad that I'm here in a city with a good police department such as the HPD. I do think you guys should negotiate not giving all these traffic tickets. You know that quota? Yeah, man. But other than that, man, I don't have no problem.
We're going to look into that.
Hey, thanks for joining us this week. Next week, we'll be back on Life in the Law, and we will analyze the DD case. We'll have a couple of attorneys on to talk about the use of self-defense in that case and whether or not he should have a retrial. Until then, thank you, and we'll see you next week.